Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers and students. Today we will discuss the foreign policy of Pakistan. Foreign policy in general has already been discussed, but today we will be more specific about the foreign policy of our country, of Pakistan. And let me tell you at the beginning that this lecture will not only be useful for the students of international relations at BS level, but this will also cover part of the course of Pakistan studies at that level. So it can be utilized in both ways. So if some of you are appearing in that examination, you can also benefit from this lecture. Even if you're not a student of international relations and appearing in the examination in the paper of international relations. So without further delay, let us take a start. Foreign policy, as briefly I have already discussed that the definition of foreign policy and everything I have discussed, but briefly for those who haven't gone through that lecture about the foreign policy. So for them, the definition of the foreign policy, it is the relation between sovereign states, and what kind of relations would be established by one state with another state is basically the foreign policy of that state. So it is the relations between the states. In short, you can the policy which is adopted by the state towards another state is basically its foreign policy. So this definition is enough, and if you want to go into detail about the foreign policy, about the nature of the foreign policy or its definition and how states go about it, then you can watch my exclusive lecture on this, the topic of the foreign policy. But over here we will be more focused with the foreign policy of Pakistan. So what are the principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan? There must be some principles around which the foreign policy of Pakistan would revolve, and among such principles, number one is the peaceful coexistence. Like Pakistan does not want to be at the loggerheads with other states, so that's why it says that Pakistan should always strive for the peaceful coexistence. And then we have the non-alignment policy as well. Excuse me for a while, please. So then we have this non-alignment as one of the principles of the foreign policy, and I will discuss that why we could not remain non-aligned for most of the time in our history. So I will also go into a little bit of detail about that issue, because clearly we have been siding with different powers, particularly the United States of America. So we will I'll try to shed some light on that as well. Then we have to abide by the Charter of the United Nations. This is also one of the principles of the foreign policy, or one of the guiding principles, you might say, of our foreign policy. Then we have to work for the unity of the Islamic world. This is what the foreign policy of Pakistan says, that Pakistan has to work for the unity of the Islamic world. But if and buts are definitely there, so we will discuss that as well. Then international and regional cooperation. So Pakistan should work for the international and regional cooperation. Again, there are ifs and buts, but we will discuss that when we reach there. And what are the objectives of the foreign policy of Pakistan? So there are broadly there are three objectives. Number one is the national security. Pakistan, whatever Pakistan does at the international level, the national security is definitely over the minds of its policy makers, and they devise their policy according to that. Then economic development is another objective of the foreign policy of Pakistan, like the economic development of Pakistan. And then the preservation of the ideology of Pakistan, since Pakistan came into being as a result of an ideology, the Islamic ideology or the two-nation theory. So that thing is also one of the objectives of the foreign policy of Pakistan. Then what are the determinants of the foreign policy of our country? So and all these things which I am elaborating now, that will be discussed broadly while we go into the discussion about these things. But for your understanding, these are some of the major pointers. So if you keep these pointers in your mind, then we will be able to elaborate things in a better and professional manner, diligently. Okay, what are the determinants of the foreign policy of Pakistan? So the determinants of the foreign policy of Pakistan are almost like, the same determinants which we have been discussing under the topic of the national interest, or which we have been discussing under the national power or under the foreign policy. So these are almost the same determinants. But for your understanding, security is the foremost determinant of the foreign policy of Pakistan. So our security concerns actually shape our foreign policy. Whatever policy we adopt, it is kind of guided by our security concerns. Number second is the ideology. So if you are secure, only then you will be taking care of your ideology. So that is why ideology is kept on number 2. So number second, and you can even change the roles of or the sequence of this, so there is no hard and fast rules about it. So ideology is again another determinants of our foreign policy. It determines the shape of our foreign policy. Why we have to work for the unity of the Islamic world? Because the Islamic ideology of Pakistan says so. So that is why we have kept it as one of the principles or objectives, the principles of our foreign policy. So that ideology guides our foreign policy. Why do we take an aggressive posture whenever there is a blasphemous material across the world from a Western country? Whenever that such kind of blasphemous material against our holy prophet or against our religion appears, so Pakistan takes an aggressive posture. It records its concerns. It records its concern with all those actors. So it is the ideology. Ideology actually guides us. It determines our foreign policy in that regard. Then definitely our national interests, they are one of the determinants of our foreign policy. Then diplomacy is another determinant. So it is almost the same kind of discussion which we have already discussed under different topics, like the national interest, the national power, the foreign policy in general. And then public opinion also shapes our foreign policy. So whenever there is some incident, some issue across the world, and when the public opinion pressurizes or it is built over, so when the public opinion is built, then a pressure is also exerted on the government, and then government also adopts a certain set of policies towards a country or a few countries, or it steps back from certain sets of policy which it intended to adopt, and if the public opinion is against those policies. Then what is the decision making process in our country? Because you know that in our country we have seen 3 dictatorships in the country: Ayub Khan, Ziaul Haq, and Pervez Musharraf. And then we have seen democracies. So it is a mixed kind of history: dictatorship, then democracy, then dictatorship, then democracy, then dictatorship, then democracy. So it is like this. So what was the decision making process during all those setups, different kind of setups? So that also determines the foreign policy of our country. And let me give you a brief example, that it was General Ziaul Haq when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. So Pakistan, it was easy for Pakistan to take a decision regarding the Afghan issue, and then it took a decision and participated in the Afghan jihad, supported the Afghan Mujahideen. And then again after 9/11, it was Pervez Musharraf, a dictator, a military man ruling the country. So it was easy for him to adopt whatever policy he wanted to adopt at that time. So that decision making had this country been run by democratic governments at that time, the policy outcome might have been quite different from whatever we have seen in the past. maybe we would have treaded on the same path, but we would have adopted different means for that under a democratic regime. But under a one-man rule, then we adopted another set of policies or another set of means. So that decision making also matters when it comes to the foreign policy making in Pakistan. So it is also one of the determinants, and it is a determinant of different countries, in many countries, in almost all of the countries. So the power structure of the decision making processes, they also determine your foreign policy. So now let's come to the guiding principles. And the guiding principles of the foreign policy are actually these guiding principles are something which will guide your foreign policy, but you can deviate from them, keeping in view the circumstances, the regional circumstances, the security situation, different aspects. But these are the broader outlines or the strategic goals, you might say. So these are some of the principles which guide you towards the achievement of your strategic goals. It will be better to call it like this. So these guiding principles, they are non-binding, but states work for the achievement of it, and Pakistan works for the achievement of these guiding principles, or it tries to act upon these guiding principles whenever there is no resistance in front of it. So what is the number one guiding principle? That is the protection of freedom and sovereignty. So it is like the protection of the freedom and sovereignty of Pakistan. This is the guiding principle, one of the guiding principles of the Pakistan foreign policy. So Pakistan, as you know, that it has been achieved, this country has been achieved after great sacrifices. So we cannot compromise on our freedom or on our sovereignty, though some might argue that we have compromised on our sovereignty so many times. But in the current age and time, that absolute concept, the concept of absolute sovereignty is no more there. Every state compromises on its sovereignty, and then it gains something out of that at some level. So that classic concept of sovereignty is no more there. Even if you talk about the US, if you talk about China, they even compromise on the classic idea of sovereignty. It is not compromise on sovereignty, but it looks like from the realist perspective, it will look like that they have compromised on sovereignty. But if you look at sovereignty from a liberal point of view, from that liberalism point of view, so then you will come to know that that is not a compromise on sovereignty. It is just the norm of the day. In this current age and time, every country, may it be a powerful country, even the powerful countries, they even compromise on their sovereignties. But the sovereignty, that notion of sovereignty, which is explained or elaborated by the realist school of thought, not that sovereignty which is prevailing in the world at current, right, under the liberal school of thought or the liberalism. So that is one principle. The other principle or guiding principles of Pakistan's foreign policy is the cordial relations with the Muslim countries. So if you look into this principle of Pakistan's foreign policy, that Pakistan will have to have good relations with the Muslim countries, take the example of many Muslim countries who have not been in favor of Pakistan right from its inception. Take the example of Afghanistan. Then take the example of many other Muslim countries who haven't supported the stance of Pakistan on international stage that openly. At times they have even opposed the stance of Pakistan, but Pakistan even then tries to have good relations with the Muslim countries. And now let me elaborate this point, because this is a very intricate point and some people might object over it. There might be confusion in your minds as well, those who are watching me. So the point is that let's take a start from the Afghan issue. We have cordial relation with Afghanistan, and we have been developing good relations with Afghanistan, despite the fact that Afghanistan did not accept Pakistan as a sovereign independent state after its independence in 1947. But Pakistan, even when Afghanistan recognized Pakistan as an independent state, then Pakistan started developing good relations with Afghanistan. It was only in the 1970s when the internal situation in Afghanistan deteriorated as a result of the SAR revolution and then the subsequent Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. The situation deteriorated, and then Pakistan accepted the Afghan Muhajirin in this country, and then afterwards people started blaming the leftists in Pakistan and their like-minded sympathizers, or their like-minded, they also started blaming Pakistan for having its role in the Afghan issue. But if you look into the Afghan issue was not created by Pakistan. It was created by the international power struggle at the world stage between the two superpowers. And when this rivalry was created, I have already explained it in one of my previous lectures that Pakistan had already experienced the Soviet role in the 1951 Rawalpindi conspiracy, and then in the 1971 the Bangladesh or the East Pakistan debacle. So we have already seen the role of the Soviet Union in that era, and that was why that Pakistan was quite worried about the Afghan invasion, and it started supporting the Afghan Mujahideen, the Afghan fighters, so freedom fighters. It started supporting them, and that was why it is wrong to blame Pakistan, that Pakistan has been meddling in the affairs in Afghanistan. When Afghanistan became insecure for Pakistan, or when it could not remain stabilized, so when it could not remain stable, only then Pakistan started supporting this faction or that faction in the Afghan trouble or in the Afghan fiasco. And the reason was that other actors were also supporting different factions. So then Pakistan had also to play a role in that. Whenever there is a conflict, just look at the conflict of Syria, look at the conflict of Egypt, look at the conflict of Libya. How many actors are there involved in these countries? So Pakistan also got involved in Afghanistan, but this was the context of it. And then Pakistan had good relations with the Taliban government in Afghanistan. When it had good relations, the anti-Taliban elements, who were supported by Indians mostly, they had already that in their mind that Pakistan is supporting someone which they do not support. So when they came to power after the 9/11, so they adopted a different policy towards Pakistan, and they started blaming Pakistan along with the US, along with India, that Pakistan is meddling in the affairs of Afghanistan. So this narrative started becoming popular in Pakistan as well. But this is the reality of it, that Pakistan never did that. And yeah, whenever there would be an actor involved doing something against the interest or the national security of Pakistan in its neighborhood, so Pakistan will have to definitely step up its effort to counter those efforts, anti-Pakistan efforts in its neighborhood. And this is what every independent country does at international level. There are many examples, hundreds of examples I can cite, but this is not the point over here to cite many examples. I've just quoted a few examples like Libya, Syria. So that point is also wrong, that Pakistan did not work for the cordial relation. Pakistan did work for the cordial relation, and now in the Afghan peace process, Pakistan is playing a vital role. In the Afghan talks with the US Taliban talks, Pakistan played a vital role in that. So it is basically Pakistan is having cordial relation. One more point which is also very important under this discussion, that you might have heard on the television today is let me check the date. Today is 14th July when I am recording this, 14th July 2020. So on 14th July 2020, a news piece appeared in the newspaper that Pakistan has opened the Wagah border for transit trade with Afghanistan by India. Now this is, let me correct some facts over here again. Some journalists misquoted this, some analysts misquoted it, like even Talat Hussain is one of them, and he raised some questions that what is the fate of Kashmir? You are opening a transit trade route for Afghanistan and you have forgotten the cause of Kashmir and the lockdown in Kashmir. So let me correct this fact over here. It was an agreement signed between Pakistan and Afghanistan in 2010, and it is known as the Afghan-Pakistan Trade Agreement. Afghan-Pakistan Trade Agreement, APTA, signed in 2010. And under this agreement, Pakistan allowed Afghanistan to have trade via Pakistan, right? And now when Pakistan has opened this corridor, the transit route again, so you should ask this question from all those who are criticizing this policy of Pakistan at this stage, that when this was closed, when this border was closed under the APTA. So the border was closed in March 2020 after the outbreak of coronavirus. Due to the outbreak of coronavirus, it wasn't closed due to the Kashmir issue between Pakistan and India and the recent development after the 5th August 2019. It wasn't closed due to that issue because Afghanistan was benefiting from this trade. Afghanistan used to export most of its agriculture products from Afghanistan to India. So Afghanistan is benefiting from this trade. It is not that India will export via Pakistan to Afghanistan. Pakistan has closed that area for India, that India will not be able to export from Afghanistan via Pakistan to Afghanistan. If it wants to export, it can use the air corridor. It can use some other route, but not through Pakistan. So that is one thing which is clear. And why Pakistan is doing this? Because it wants to have cordial relation with the Muslim countries. Afghanistan is a Muslim country, despite the fact that Pakistan is being blamed blatantly by many Afghanis even for its role in Afghanistan. But even then, since it is a Muslim country, so Pakistan is facilitating this Muslim neighbor of ours. So this is one example. Then over the Kashmir issue, when the Muslim countries, particularly in the Middle East, when they did not support the stance of Pakistan, what did Pakistan do? After the 5th August 2019, what did Pakistan do? Pakistan did not sever its relations with the Muslim countries. It only told them, it only tried to impress upon them, but it did not close its relation. It did not sever its relations with the Muslim countries, because this is one of the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan, that it will be having good relations with its neighbor. Gulbashan Yadav, he came from Iran to Pakistan, and Iran hasn't even up till now said a single word publicly about Gulbashan Yadav and why he was Hussein Patel residing in Iran and what was he doing in Iran, why the Iranians were not aware about his activities. Iran did not say anything about it, right, publicly. And even then Pakistan did not sever its relations with the Iran, because Pakistan wants to have cordial relations with the Muslim countries. So these are some of the examples which I thought important to give you or to quote over here, because as a student of international relations, you should have some idea about what do we mean by the cordial relations with the Muslim countries. Then another thing is the non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. This is another guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan, that it should not interfere in the internal affairs of other other countries. If you see any kind of interference of Pakistan in the internal affairs of other countries, that will be a retaliation. Take the example of Afghanistan again. In the 1980s and in the 1990s, it was a retaliation. It was to stop the spread of communism from Afghanistan so that it cannot reach to Pakistan. It was like that. And to stop the enemies of Pakistan from supporting anti-Pakistan elements in Afghanistan or from conducting anti-Pakistan activities from Afghanistan. This is why then Pakistan started interference. Otherwise, when up till Afghanistan was till the time Afghanistan was a secure country, there was a stable government in Afghanistan. Pakistan did not interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. Right, so that is another case, and I think that point has been clarified. If you have any question, you can ask me in the comment, so I will further try to shed light over this issue, but I am quite clear about it, and I hope that I have made you clear about it as well. If not, you can ask me in the question answer session or under the in a comment under this video. Then another guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan is the implementation of the United Nations Charter. So Pakistan always tries to implement the United Nations Charter in the country, like there were these freedoms which have been explained or expressed. The basic freedoms in the Charter of the United Nations are part of the Constitution of Pakistan, and they have not only been part of the 1973 Constitution of Pakistan, they have been part of the 1962 and the 1956 Constitution of Pakistan as well. So Pakistan tries to implement the Charter of the United Nations. Recently, when the United Nations introduced the Millennium Development Goal, and then these were the Sustainable Development Goal, they were converted. So Pakistan tried to adopt all those measures in Pakistan as well. So it is trying to adopt the UN or implement the UN Charter in Pakistan, and it became a member of the United Nations in 1947. So since 1947, Pakistan is trying to adopt or implement this charter, and it is effectively implementing it. Then Pakistan will have to work for the promotion of the world peace. So what do we mean by the promotion of the world peace? Pakistan does not have any aggressive designs against any country. If you see some of our designs against India, so that is just because that India is trying to become the ruler of the South Asian region and have its supremacy in South Asia, which Pakistan does not accept. India is threatening almost all of its neighbor. Take the example of Bangladesh, take the example of Bhutan, take the example of Nepal, take the example of Pakistan, then take the example of the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. They were being supported by India. So India is almost taking all of its small neighbors in South Asia for granted, but Pakistan is one such neighbor of India which is challenging the traditional authority of India in the region. And so that is, if you see these aggressive designs of Pakistan, they are basically counter measures adopted against the policy of India towards Pakistan. Recently, you would have heard many statements by the Indian government members, their ministers, that they are actively supporting insurgency in Bangladesh. They have been supporting insurgency in East Pakistan, and now they are actively supporting insurgencies in Balochistan. So what have they been doing? What are they doing? This is what they have been doing. So that is why Pakistan also tries to counter these steps taken by India. And then we can see the aggressive designs of Pakistan against India. But these aggressive designs are just there to counter the Indian designs. Otherwise, there is no need for Pakistan, and Pakistan at large tries to promote the world peace. It even sends its troops for the UN in the UN peace missions across the globe. So that is why. And why does it do that? Because it is one of the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan. Then again, a very controversial point is that the non-alignment is also one of the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan. But then you can see that Pakistan was member of CATO and CENTO as well. Pakistan was part of an alliance, and it could not remain non-aligned. Again, when did Pakistan sign these? That they were in 1954 and 1959, I guess. So when Pakistan signed these, you just need to keep in mind that 1951 Rawalpindi conspiracy had already occurred. Right? So the 1951 Rawalpindi conspiracy, when it occurred, then Pakistan thought that now it should really make an alliance with the United States. Otherwise, these subversive activities by the Soviets in Pakistan might also destabilize Pakistan. So for its own national security and national interest, Pakistan aligned itself with the United States at that time because there was a Soviet threat. So we need to look towards these things in perspective. If we minus the context of the things, then we would criticize why Pakistan did that, why Pakistan did not go with Russia, why did it make itself an ally of the United States. But the context was that, do not forget the subversive activities of the Soviet Union right after the end of the Second World War, and that was just 7-8 years down the road after the end of the Second World War. So Soviet Union was actively involved in subversive activities because one of its principles was, or one of the slogans which it raised was that to export the revolution to the whole world. So definitely it was trying to do that, and then Pakistan had to make an alliance with someone in order to counter effectively the subversive activities of a superpower in its neighborhood. So that was one reason that Pakistan aligned itself. But then we went to the 1965 war with India. We went to the 1971 war with India. The United States of America did not come for the rescue of Pakistan, because that alliance, it said that that alliance was only meant to counter the Soviets. It wasn't meant for your regional scuffles or wars, the localized wars between two neighbors. It can only be utilized, it can only be made effective if there is a threat of the Soviet invasion in Pakistan. So Pakistan could not be helped, Pakistan could not take help from these alliances in its wars with India, and that was why in the 1970s, though Pakistan presented some evidence to the US that there was Soviet involvement in the 1971, but even then the US, so Pakistan then thought that, okay, it is better to leave these alliances. Then Pakistan left all those alliances and became a member of the non-alignment movement later on in the 1970s. So, and why did it do that? Because then it thought that, okay, these alliances are doing no good for me, and now I should become a non-aligned, a member of the non-alignment movement. And just look at the irony over here, that Pakistan, when it left, again Afghan war started. So when Afghan war started, so it was not part of any alliance like SATO and CENTO, but the United States had to re-engage Pakistan re-engage itself with Pakistan and re-engage Pakistan with itself. So both these countries had to re-engage with each other in Afghanistan to counter the Soviets. So it was like this. Then another guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan is the support of the self-determination and condemnation of the racial discrimination across the globe. So in this condemnation of the racial discrimination, South Africa is an example. There was racial discrimination in South Africa, and Pakistan did never approve of that. Number one, Palestine, support of self-determination. Up till now, Pakistan hasn't developed diplomatic relations with Israel. Pakistan always raises its voice against the atrocities committed against the atrocities committed by Israel against the Palestinians. So Pakistan raised its voice against those atrocities at all forum, even at the United Nations. But then there is the United States. So the United States vetoes all the resolutions brought forward against the Israel. Then Pakistan has always raised its voice for the self-determination or the right of self-determination of the Kashmiri people. So that is another issue which you can link with the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan, since it is in the guiding principles in the foreign policy of Pakistan, and that is why Pakistan follows these things. And after its independence, there were many countries in Africa who were still being ruled by their colonial masters, and there were struggle for independence. So Pakistan raised its voice for their independence as well. Pakistan said that okay, this is their right of self-determination which is being violated. So these people should have their right of self-determination. So it was about the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan, and these guiding principles have definitely their roots in our cultural heritage, in our Islamic culture as well. So now afterwards we will discuss some of the internal and external factors of Pakistan, but this lecture cannot be concluded today. It will definitely have 2 parts. So what are the internal and external focusing points of the foreign policy of Pakistan? Number 1 is the current focusing point of the foreign policy of Pakistan. So you can look into it as, like, we have already discussed something in the foreign policy of under the topic of foreign policy, like the geographical location. So yeah, it matters in Pakistan as well. Then the size of the state, it matters in Pakistan as well. Then what is the natural capacity of the country, it matters in Pakistan as well. What are some of the external factors then? So alliances, the power structure, the world public opinion. So all these matters, all these factors, they matter in case of the foreign policy of Pakistan as well. Currently, security against external and internal challenges. This is one of the current focusing points of the foreign policy of Pakistan. You can see there are many external and internal challenges for Pakistan, and Pakistan is trying to cope with all these challenges. So this is something which we can say that is under the focus of the state of Pakistan right now. Then Pakistan also says that there should be sovereign equality of states. So Pakistan always raises its voice for the sovereign equality of states against any kind of injustice committed against any other international entity. And then as already mentioned, that Pakistan does not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries, so that you can intervention and then in this interference, so you can think about it in these terms. Then Pakistan says that okay, I will have to work within the framework of the international institutions like the United Nations, but Pakistan raises its voice for the restructuring of things over there, so that voices of all the oppressed countries or nations be heard at that forum equally. Then Pakistan always feels for the economic condition of the developing countries, and then Pakistan talks for it. And this is one of the guiding principles of the country, and you can see that when after the outbreak of this pandemic, the Prime Minister of Pakistan raised its voice not only for the economic well-being of the people of Pakistan, he also raised his voice for the third world countries, poor third world countries, who he thought were under debt. So and this thing was taken from the guiding principles of the foreign policy of Pakistan. Then Pakistan always think positive about the Charter of the United Nations, and it tries to implement it anywhere in the world, including Pakistan. So Pakistan volunteers its troops for that, to implement the Charter of the United Nations. It takes active part in the debates in the United Nations General Assembly over different issues, and when it becomes part of the Security Council for 2 years, when it became part of the Security Council for 2 years. Now that seat would be given to India, but for 2 years the non-permanent seat of the Security Council. When Pakistan was there for 2 years, Pakistan raised its voice for many global issues. And talked about different things which Pakistan thought that were somehow not good for the world peace. So this is the current focusing. Then again, that was the guiding principles, but the current focusing point of Pakistan foreign policy, that was the self-determination, right to self-determination, any kind of discrimination, racial discrimination, against any kind of racial discrimination, that was under the guiding principles we discussed. But currently Pakistan also raises its voice. Take the issue of Kashmir. So Pakistan is raising its voice, Pakistan raises its voice for the oppression in Afghanistan, in the Middle East. So it is there to raise its voice on the world stage. Why Pakistan is so important on the world stage? We should not exaggerate the importance of Pakistan, but we should at the same time not even underestimate it. So only then we will strike a balance between the exaggeration and the underestimation, or the overestimation and the underestimation. So we should not overestimate the part of Pakistan, the role of Pakistan, but we should not underestimate it as well. So Pakistan is the second largest country as far as the second largest Muslim country as far as the population is concerned. That is one major aspect of its importance. Secondly, Pakistan is a nuclear state. It is it has got nuclear capability. So that makes Pakistan more important. Thirdly, Pakistan has got a regular disciplined army, and then it has got animosity in the region with India, with which the United States of America up till now, or even right now, is trying to align itself. So all these factors make Pakistan a very important regional actor, at least. Pakistan cannot be ignored. The reason is that when China was out there, the example of that, when China started this BRI and then flagship CPEC of BRI, so what happened that this flagship was, it is passing through Pakistan. The United States tried time and time again to arrest this partnership, to somehow disrupt this partnership between China and Pakistan. Even India tried, but when it now realized that it is not possible for the US to contain China in that manner, so it started its own initiative to counter CPEC in the region. Just a few days ago it announced, and that is the C5+1. The Central Asian 5 republics are there, and then +1 is the US, and it will be the same kind of projects will be implemented as are there in the BRI. So it means, and then Pakistan will also be included in that, because from Central Asia they will have to take all these oil and gas and this energy to India, all the way from Central Asia to India. So they will have to deal with Pakistan as well, and so they will also try to align Pakistan, and they will try to give some carrots to Pakistan so that it does not go completely in the Chinese camp, and it will be a better opportunity for Pakistan as well to take benefits from both these countries, the US and China. Take this CPEC from China, take any kind of advantages from China, and then the US is developing its own C5+1. So this C5+1 is for this region, Central Asia and South Asia. So Pakistan will also take benefit from it, and that shows the importance of Pakistan. This is not something which which is one might call exaggeration or overestimation. It shows the importance of Pakistan in the eyes of these great powers or superpowers of the world. Another point of Pakistan's foreign policy is that it has violent independent foreign policy whenever it comes to its nuclear program. Whenever it comes to it, it has a violent foreign policy. It did not listen to anyone back in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 80s, it did not listen to anyone to halt its nuclear program, and it did not listen to anyone when it came to detonating the nuclear bombs in the 1998 as a result of the Indian nuclear tests in May 1998, in the same month. That was 13th May 1998, the Indian test, and then Pakistan tested on 28th May 1998. So it did not listen to anyone, though there was a lot of international pressure over the Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif at that time and the Pakistani establishment. But luckily, both the civilian government and the establishment, they did not succumb to the international pressure, and they detonated these nuclear tests. They carried out these nuclear tests, and Pakistan became a declared nuclear country of the world. So it has got violent foreign policy when it comes to the nuclear status of Pakistan. Then the strategic location of Pakistan is supreme, it is prime, as I have already discussed. Central Asia, on the one hand, the maritime oil supply lines are there from the Middle East to all these regions, and these supply lines are there, the Strait of Hormuz, and so these lines are there. Then these Central Asian republics, they are energy rich countries, and then we have got this India, which is energy hungry. So yes, definitely it will have to go through Pakistan, and these oil from the Persian Gulf and the Middle East, they will have to go from Pakistan to China. China is the biggest consumer of oil in the world, so this oil will have to go from Pakistan. So Pakistan has got a prime location. It has got a very important strategic location, and that also plays a vital role. It is only up to the policy makers of Pakistan how to use its cards, and unfortunately Pakistan hasn't been using its cards wisely, otherwise the fate of Pakistan would have been changed today. But Pakistan, unfortunately, under many ambiguous circumstances, Pakistan could not utilize this card wisely. Otherwise we would have been living, we would be living in a different in a much stronger, economically much stronger Pakistan now. Then Pakistan became a major non-NATO ally of the United States in its war against terrorism in Afghanistan. So it also shows the importance of Pakistan, and then Pakistan played a vital role in making the US-Taliban peace talks possible and making it a success. And even now the US is dependent on Pakistan to impress upon the Taliban, so that the withdrawal of the US troops is a smooth one and the Taliban do not pose any kind of problem for them. But Pakistan, as I have already mentioned in different lectures, but in this one as well, again for your understanding, that Pakistan has got very strained relations with India, and the core issue behind that relationship, strained relationship with India, is the issue of Kashmir. If Kashmir is resolved, Pakistan would have no strained or stressed issues with India. So Kashmir is there, and India wants to have the whole of Kashmir, and Pakistan wants to have a plebiscite in Kashmir, and then let the Kashmiris decide about their fate, as it was said in the 1949 United Nations resolution. Then Pakistan has got good relations with Iran and China, and these good relations I have already explained. So these are the focusing points of Pakistan's foreign policy, and right now you can see that on the one hand it is giving way to the Afghan trade, transit trade to India. So that is an example, that is an example of the good relations of Pakistan with Afghanistan, or the efforts of Pakistan, the well-intentioned efforts of Pakistan to establish good relations with Afghanistan. So that is one example. Then relations with Iran have already improved, started showing signs of improvement. So these relations have been improved, and CPEC is there, China is there. Definitely we have good relations with China, so we need not to go into detail about the relations of Pakistan and China. Everybody knows that Pakistan and China have got good good strategic and economic relations, and this is not a recent development, it is since the establishment of Pakistan. Okay, then another thing, during the Cold War, Pakistan had to look towards the United States of America due to the Soviet threat or the Soviet expansionism. So I have already elaborated that point in this lecture. So that was one of the focusing points of Pakistan, and the current focusing point is that Pakistan is now trying to cultivate good relations with Russia as well. And now Pakistan and Russia are getting closer to each other, and Pakistan is getting closer to China as well, and Pakistan is also trying to have good relations with the United States as well, and with the countries in the Middle East as well. And even for India, Pakistan says that okay, we can have good relations, we can start a dialogue with you, but you need to take certain steps, certain measures, and then we are fine with you. We can have a debate with you about core issues between India and Pakistan. So this was how it was done, and this is how the relations between the foreign policy of Pakistan is. What are its guiding principles, what are its objectives, what are its determinants, what are its current focusing points, and some of the external and internal factors. But in the coming sequel, or in the coming part of this topic, I will try to cover some more aspects and try not to stretch it over the third part. So that was it from me for today. Inshallah, see you in the next video with the remaining aspects of the foreign policy of Pakistan. Up till then, take care. Allah Hafiz.